Xavier Worthy and Chop Robinson could be round one targets for the Cowboys if they ignore offensive line. We'll explain why in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on a classic Monopoly. So join your friends, download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Welcome to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, we are just over 24 hours until the NFL draft. Are you getting nervous yet?
Yeah, you start to get the kind of excitement, right? It's the classic. I think we reference this almost every year. It's the classic Disney commercial. I'm too excited to sleep. It's all those things. I think this year more than anything, though, more than previous years, I'm just like, what's gonna happen? I have no idea what's gonna happen. I'm excited to talk about it, but like it feels like more than anything, there's a sense of how's this gonna go down? Like how is this gonna happen? What's going on? Because there's so little going on in the offseason before this.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of anticipation here, and not that there isn't always with the Cowboys, but more so than previous years.
There's just a lot of drama in the entire NFL right now. I mean, we could have quarterbacks being picked 1, 2, 3, and 4. We've got a quarterback that doesn't seem thrilled about going to the Washington Commanders, which I find hilarious.
Yeah.
We've got a bunch of receivers that are waiting on contract, especially now that Amon-Ra St. Brown got a deal. So it's going to be a wild time during the NFL draft. But we've got questions to get to today. And the first one is from Eric Cold. It's a really good one. What is your favorite realistic non-offensive line option for the Cowboys at pick 24?
Well, the name that kind of keeps showing up for me at 24 that is, I think, a solid player. He's out of position of need for the Cowboys, who, I think in any other draft, the Cowboys would just run up to the podium to go get, and it's Johnny Newton from Illinois. He's a defensive tackle that is a penetrator. He's good versus the run. He's athletic. I think the reason he's down where the Cowboys are picking is because he missed out on a large portion of the offseason of the kind of training, draft prep stuff because of an injury. But I think you go and put on the tape, and he is just incredibly disruptive and just constantly just a game wrecker. It was obviously the best player on that Illinois squad. But was the main focus no matter who they were playing in the Big Ten that week, and still was able to wreck games against the likes of Ohio State and those guys. So I think if the Cowboys, there was a rumor that came out, Daniel Jeremiah came out and said that based on the phone calls that he's been receiving, that everyone and their mother is trading up to go get tackles. If the Cowboys get completely wiped out at tackle, and they get down and maybe even lose a center or two above where they pick, and Johnny Newton is staring them at 24, he certainly isn't a terrible option to take if you don't get the kind of lined up need the way you want it. I think he would be a great fit. And again, when you consider what's going on with Osa and he's in a contract year, I think Osa is one of these defensive tackles that's likely to get paid a lot because he's one of the few difference makers at the position. Sliding in Newton for a year for them to play next to each other for a year with the potential of him taking over that spot in a year, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's also just not a lot of depth in this class at this position. If you're looking at the expert consensus board right now, we only have two defensive tackles that are ranked inside the top 50. It's Byron Murphy at 16, and it's Johnny Newton at 27, which is funny about Johnny Newton because earlier on in this process, like back in March, Johnny Newton was all the way up to number 11 on the consensus board. Once the injury kind of came out, that's when he's fallen quite a bit. But I agree. Like, I think if you feel good about his injury was it the fifth metatarsal? It's that
Yeah,
Jones fracture. If you feel
Jones
good about it, I've got no problem with him at 24. It's just I do get a little bit nervous about those big guys having foot injuries already
yeah.
coming into the NFL. But talent wise, I mean, he's incredible.
Well, I mean, the injury is why you even have the opportunity.
Yes.
So that is part of the deal.
Sounds like
Absolutely.
a Dallas
Otherwise,
Cowboy pick all day long. Then, like, what
well,
are
I
we
mean,
doing?
he just need to be a second round pick, right? Yeah, and yeah, but I mean that's why you have the opportunity to even take him in the bottom half of the first round, is because otherwise, this is a disruptive
Yeah.
playmaker at a position where teams are really trying to get disruptive playmakers, and there's a huge shortage of them. So to get a guy like this at 24 would be, only because he has a Jones fracture. Otherwise he would be a much higher pick.
I've got two names that I want to throw at you really quickly. The first one is Chop Robinson from Penn State. The Cowboys have had some success with Penn State pass rushers before. I love that Chop Robinson, over 250 pounds, ran in the 4.4s. The agility stuff was off the chart. And then you look at the metrics from PFF: 97th percentile pass rush grade, 99th percentile no play action pass rush grade, 90th percentile true pass set pass rush grade. Like, he is so explosive. And I think if the idea is that maybe Micah Parsons is going to be playing more quote unquote linebacker and lining up over the center, maybe you need another guy like this. We'll say that Mike Zimmer has a history with like a Danielle Hunter, who didn't have a lot of sack production coming out of LSU, but was just so explosive. I could see Chop Robinson just being too good for the Cowboys to pass up at 24.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you look at the kind of history that we've seen so far of these Penn State players. They end up being a lot better pros than they were collegiate players, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that Chop Robinson is 100% on that same sort of track. It seems like, just based on his athletic profile and the kind of lack of production that you saw at Penn State, which is kind of the knock on him to a large degree. But again, you look back
The
at the
advanced
history
stats are
there.
so nice, though. I mean, that's what
Yeah,
so
that's what
encouraging.
ultimately matters, right? And
Yeah.
so I do think that he's going to be a better pro, and I think that it makes a ton of sense for the Cowboys. If you just dig even a little bit, beyond all that other stuff, we obviously lost all that depth at defensive end that we had last year, with Dorrance Armstrong and Fowler walking out of the door. So obviously Sam Williams is someone that we're relying on a lot, but that doesn't mean that that's the end of your depth. I mean, so you definitely need to add another pass rusher. And I will just add in, for both of these arguments, Mike McCarthy talked about in the press conference yesterday that most teams have multiple first or high round picks on that defensive line. The Cowboys are kind of short on that number. So I would not at all be shocked if things played out right, that Chop Robinson ended up being the pick at 24, and I'm sure the Cowboys would be thrilled with him.
It's a little bit like when the Cowboys drafted CD in 2020. It's not a primary need, but it is a secondary need. Like, the Cowboys didn't have a number 3 receiver. I don't know if they have a third pass rusher, and especially with DeMarcus Lawrence entering the final year of his deal, it's just really intriguing to me. The other one is Xavier Worthy. Brandon Cooks is a free agent after this year. Jalen Tolbert is not a speedster. I think he's kind of your do-everything receiver. Love CeeDee Lamb, but CeeDee Lamb's game is not based on speed. I think Xavier Worthy gives you a different dynamic on offense. He gives you somebody that's really good with the football in his hands. You can play him in the backfield. You can play him in the slot. You can play him on the outside. I think he's worth the 24th overall pick. I've got him as my 19th best player in this class. There's just not many players that come around like this that are as fast as him and as productive as he was in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, he's a rare player, and I think that's kind of would be the argument if the Cowboys were to take him, is that, look, again, sort of like Chop, right, where maybe not a primary need, right, but a need that is definitely going to be coming around the corner, especially at the end of next season, at the end of the season, right? So I think you can get out in front of it by having Worthy on the team, getting him into the roster, kind of ease him into the situation, because you do have Cooks, you do have Tolbert. So you don't necessarily need to throw him on the field. You can put him out there in special packages to get the football in his hands to kind of ease him into playing. But
how nice would it be to have him learn behind Brandon Cooks for a year?
Yeah,
not be forced as the number 2 receiver, but learn how Brandon Cooks has basically become this 1,000-yard receiver every year. This would be a really good spot for him.
I think so too. Yeah, it's not a lot of early pressure for him. He's got somebody that he can learn to, like, it's not even just that he's a wide receiver, but you're right. Like the fact that he's a speed guy, like Worthy, that he could teach him how to kind of leverage that speed against NFL corners to create leverage. Yeah, I do think that again, another one where it makes a ton of sense, right? I mean, if you eliminate all the Cowboys' needs and the fact that we think that they're going offensive line,
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense that the Cowboys were to pull the trigger in a vacuum of Xavier Worthy at 24.
So Landon and I have been discussing all offseason the idea that the Cowboys are trying to reset this roster with an eye towards 2025, 2026.
But they're just not talking about it, they're just not saying anything about it.
Exactly. What would a draft look like if that is the goal? We will discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. So we want to let you know that the Locked On NFL Mock Draft Show is available now. Find the ultimate 6-episode series on Locked On NFL Draft to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise, with live reactions from local college football experts and even the fantasy football angle. The Locked On NFL Mock Draft Show is available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, this next question comes from Jake. He wants to know, let's assume the Cowboys front office is actually smart and they managed to successfully pull off the roster reset 1 to 2 years from now. What does a draft this year look like?
I don't know that it looks that different. I think the key thing here is when you're doing a roster reset is that maybe you lean even further into BPA than you normally would, right?
Yes.
Like you kind of just are just about accumulating talent at that point. I think for the Cowboys, they need to get their offensive line in order. And I think running back maybe would become slightly less of a pressing need, I would think, right? As much as, I think you obviously have to have a starting running back, but if you're not so invested in making this next season a huge success, and you're more about investing for 2025, I think it might be more important suddenly to draft a different player in the second or third round of a need that isn't so easily filled, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, you can easily take another bite at the apple running back next year if you wanted to.
Yes, but I will also say, let's use Jonathan Brooks because that's the running back that everybody has mentioned. I can kind of understand, with his touch total being so low and coming off from injury, maybe you draft him this year, put him into a committee, and then by 2025, so now you have 25, 26, and 27 with a relatively fresh 21-year-old running back. I probably would go elsewhere. I probably would.
Brooks would be the exception, right?
I think he is exception.
You get a first round kind of talent, right? At that case,
but like a Blake Corum, I don't know. Like, let's say he's in the third round. I don't know if he makes quite as much sense because of the wear and tear in the body. And same thing with Ray Davis, who we both really like.
Even a Trey Benson to me, I feel like it's like you could probably get a Trey Benson, next year if you wanted to draft that kind of caliber, right? I think really Brooks to me is the guy that would be the exception, just because you're getting an elevated talent at a cheaper discount, and that is still in your kind of long-term interest, right?
It's why I keep coming back to the offensive line. I think offensive line is the best strategy for the here and now and the future, because obviously the Cowboys are going to try to win this year with Dak and everybody they have on the roster. If you can grab a center in round 1 and a tackle in round 2. Those guys are both going to be able to compete right away. But let's say you do move on from Dak in 2025. There's a good chance you're also going to be without Zach Martin, who is a free agent after this year. You're going to want your next quarterback, whether it's Trey Lance, whether it's somebody you draft this year, whether it's Shedeur Sanders next year. I keep pushing a little bit. You're going to want them to have at least several solid offensive linemen. It's why I would be shocked if the Cowboys leave the first 2 rounds of the draft without a starting offensive lineman.
Yeah, I mean, it just so happens that the Cowboys' immediate needs are also good long-term, draft positions, right? Like positions that, and here's the other thing that I want to remind folks that kind of gets lost in this whole conversation. And we've talked about this, the timelines and mismatched timelines, that sort of thing. In one of these resets, like ultimately what you're trying to do is get your roster completely set and then add the quarterback last, right?
Yes.
Add the rookie quarterback at the end, because ultimately you don't want to have to like continue. You're going to have to like use a bunch of draft picks to go get the guy that you want. So you need to use this initial, season or 2 of a rebuild to kind of make sure the roster is where it is at. And then there is the potential that you may have to use an entire draft's worth of picks to trade up to go get the quarterback you want. So it's really, and on top of that, you don't want to continue to have to do a rebuild while you're on the clock of a rookie contract, right?
That's why my answer for this would be trading back and acquiring not only picks for this year, just so you have more cheaper picks, but trying to get more picks for next year as well. Now, I'm not saying to go get a quarterback necessarily, but it gives you the option if you want to do that. So maybe you trade down from, let's say, 24 to 33, right? Carolina wants to come up
out of the first round.
And you get Carolina's second round pick next year. I don't even know if Carolina has it, but you get the point, right? Like you're moving down, you're picking up draft capital, and you still might get the same player that you got at 33 than you would have got at 24. I think that makes the most sense in a roster reset is move down, pick up draft capital, and kind of push some of your assets more into 25, 26.
I will just say that if the Cowboys did that, like if the Cowboys traded down from 24 and they didn't get any picks for this year, that's it. Like that's the blinking light that you need, guys. That what is exactly going on. That this is a roster rebuild. You're not. There's no semblance of all in where you don't spend any money in free agency and you trade back from your first round pick for future picks if you're serious about winning this season. Right.
But I will say this is a really strong draft. So I understand if people want to say you don't trade out of this draft because the guys that you're going to get at 40 might not be all that different than you get at 24. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also the reason why I wouldn't be opposed to doing that either. I think one of the reasons why the Texans made that early trade with Minnesota where they dropped from, was it 23 to 40 or whatever it was, is because they looked at their board and said,
what's the difference?
What's the difference? Right. And frankly, I'm coming back to that because I'm looking like at the consensus board right now, Landon.
Oh yeah.
And I'll give you an example. Zach Frazier, somebody who I really like from West Virginia, is 36 on the consensus board. You look at Graham Barton, who is 22 on the consensus board. I like Barton better, but I'm not sure there's a 20 spot difference between those two players.
And I think that's the argument that folks like John Park and the analytics team are constantly making, right? Is that it's better to have multiple bites at the apple. And look, I'm looking at the show. Obviously, this is something we're about to talk about, but I do think that this is something that we need to start considering is that where has the analytics department made their hey, where are they throwing their weight around in regards to draft picks and that sort of thing? I do think, look, I think there are two things here, right? Trading back is positive no matter what, I think, right? You're going to get more assets. If you're trading back for picks this year, that makes a ton of sense too, for all the reasons you just laid out, right? Like the board kind of plateaus at a certain point, especially if teams are trading up and going to get all these tackles before we can get an opportunity to get there. Trading back and still taking one of these top centers like early at the top of the third round makes sense. Or like I said, if you're actually building for a future, if it's actually a rebuild, trading back and then taking another pick next year, which you can then leverage into trading up or doing what you need to do, that makes sense as well. But it's going to be interesting to see exactly how the strategy in draft changes based on having this
Well,
new department there.
the other thing is we have so many front offices that are more analytical, and
Hmm.
teams are becoming less and less likely to trade up in the draft, which we've also seen in the last couple of years that the cost of trading up has
Yeah,
gone way down.
yeah.
So let's use that same scenario. Let's say Carolina's calling and they want to go from 33 to 24. Would you accept a third round pick in either this year or next year's draft to move down, out of the first round completely and lose that fifth year option?
Yes, I think I would.
I think I would too.
Um, I think it's the fifth year option is fantastic, and obviously it gives you a high point of leverage. But depending on what you're trying to do, I think that it's more important to get that second bite of the apple, the second opportunity to kind of get that pick back. Especially since look at what it's done when we've done mock drafts, right? It just gives you a little bit of breathing room to continue to kind of draft that hybrid BPA value kind of
Yeah.
mentality, but still allowing for if a happy accident happens, hey, I'm taking a guy who
Well,
fell to me at 56 that I never expected to be there,
l-
and I could still do what I want to do.
let's use that example. Right now, Carolina, that third round pick would be 65. I can
Yeah,
find a starting running back at 65. I can
absolutely.
find probably a linebacker at 65. This is a really good receiving class, with receivers. If you want to get
Yeah,
a receiver at 30, 65, I'll give you a couple tackles. Roger Rosengarten, Patrick Paul, and Blake Fisher are all being mocked after the top 65 picks. Sign me up for any one of those three guys. So I think
except
you're
Blake
going to see the
Fisher.
Cowboys get pretty aggressive trading down, regardless if they're considering a roster reset. But when you mentioned the analytic department, this is their first draft
Yeah.
together. I want to discuss what they could do to help the Cowboys over the draft weekend. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I've been told I'm a competitive person, and my competitive side absolutely loves Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it before. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not just one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends and my family. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like in classic Monopoly. But now I can also heist their vaults of riches for myself. And the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are answering your Twitter questions, and we've got another really good one from Jake, who wants to know the Cowboys have hired more analytics staff in the last couple of years. Do you think that changes the way they draft in any notable way?
Yeah, yeah, too. I think it's gonna give them more insight into kind of the value of positions on a broad scale, right? It's gonna give them more insight into the value of trading back and the lack of value in trading up. I mean, I think if anything, it's just going to kind of help them move away from kind of the tried and true, and I'm using air quotes here, methodologies of going with your gut and oh, I like this guy over that guy, and kind of just adding in some factual economic input into this game, which is in a lot of ways much like a market, right? Much like a market, a financial market that you would see, right? There's supply, demand,
Mhm.
there's options, there's multiple parties all vying for kind of a zero sum game, and there's a reason that those industries pay a lot of money to analytic departments on their side to kind of have mass studies on a bunch of different things. And for the Cowboys, it's hard to kind of put into one category in which the analytics department is going to help, because it feels like they're going to stick their fingers in anywhere that the team wants them to, right?
I think
Like
it's
they'll
trades. That's to be the one. I
yeah,
think it's going to be
sure.
trades. I think they're going to be more likely to trade
I
down.
agree. I think
Um,
I think if anything, first things first, what it'll probably do is give them better or different insight into like trade value, right? Like they'll probably kind of sit down with what their current trade value chart is, have a discussion if that needs to be updated at all. And really what I would love to see is, and what I've been advocating for a while, is that I think you should be doing by trade class trade value charts. I think every single
I think
trade
that's a good
value
idea.
chart should be a specific to that season, that actual draft season. So I think the analytic department obviously has the kind of bandwidth to handle something like that. So I think it's hard to kind of point to one specific thing or two specific things, because I think ultimately they're a resource that the front office is just going to point to different aspects and say, hey, give us a large scale study on what the long-term effect is of drafting running backs in the top 3 rounds, and the positives and negatives, and give us a
Well,
long-term study on blah blah blah, that sort of
I
thing,
would.
and then it's just more insight, right?
I even wonder if they could have like a discussion on, okay, the expected value of drafting a center, or let's say an
Yeah.
interior offensive player, an interior offensive lineman versus a tackle in round 1. Like, how good would the tackle need to be to exceed the value of the center who is a
How
Pro
good
Bowl
the
center?
sitter, yeah,
Yeah,
I
you know
got
what I
you.
mean? Like,
Yeah, totally.
I'm not advocating for this. I'm just putting this out there. Like, if Tyler Guyton, let's say the Cowboys come to the conclusion that they think
Yes, I
Tyler
understand.
Guyton can be an average NFL tackle,
Hmm.
how much better would Zach Frazier have to be in order to justify selecting him over Tyler Guyton? I don't know if I want to know the answer to that one specifically, because I really like Zach Frazier, but I do wonder if that kind of stuff will come into play here over the draft weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's everything from, breaking down the athletic numbers and
Mhm.
understanding what's important there, to understanding value and like I said, the kind of the gamifying of the draft. I think they're going to have their hands in a little bit of all of it. And then a lot of things that we aren't thinking of, again, because from what I understand, from what we've heard, a lot of what their job is being pointed to a specific area that the team wants them to kind of dive into and to study, and then breaking that down. So I think it's going to be a lot of little things. I expect the Cowboys to operate very differently in this draft, and that's
I
kind of
would.
why part of me I'm excited, right? Is because I think we have this expectation that this is how Jerry deals in the draft, and blah 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 blah. Blah. I have a feeling that it may change a little bit this year if the Cowboys are actually buying into some of the stuff that they're getting from the analytics department.
Well, there's that part of it as well. There was another really good question about the Mike McCarthy regime being a lot more tight-lipped than maybe the
Yeah,
previous one, right? Like last year at this time, Mozzie Smith and Matthew Bergeron, like literally the day before the draft, were not really names that were being discussed. Like what we heard was, I remember from 2 different people, "Hey, Michael Mayer's on the board. That's the Cowboys pick.
yeah,
We love
yeah.
Michael Mayer. Hey, if Dalton Kincaid's there, they're picking Dalton Kincaid," right? Like, those are the guys. Hey, Osiris Torrance, if he's there in the 2nd round, that's the guy that the Cowboys would love to draft. They passed on Osiris Torrance. They passed on Michael Mayer. They obviously weren't upset when Dalton Kincaid went off the board. We saw their reactions, right? And it was Matthew Bergeron and Mozzie Smith who the Cowboys were interested in. You go back to 2021. We really didn't hear anything about Michael Parsons at all in that
Mm.
draft, right? Like they had him in for a visit, I believe, but like there was nothing else. So I'm expecting this to be different than anything we've heard before, seen before.
Yeah, I mean, and it's all like you said, it's already been different these last 2
It
years.
has
So
been.
I do think that there is a legitimate chance that it will be even more different because of all the input that the analytical department has given them.
Should be a lot of fun. Cannot wait for
See,
Thursday. We will
excited.
be back on Thursday afternoon. We'll have a podcast. We'll also have a podcast that drops late Thursday night, probably more likely early Friday morning, but the YouTube video will be out with whatever the Cowboys decide to do in round 1, whether that's make a pick or trade out of that spot. Make sure that you're downloading the Locked On Cowboys podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.